Good morning, everybody. I trust you found the notes on the table back there. If you didn't, there are some notes back there for your availability. If you are a note taker, you like to fill things out. Even if not, I might suggest it today because we're going to be together for a little while and might just help you get through the day a little easier. Honestly, I want to thank you for coming, especially those of you who attend here. I wish I could give you a long-suffering award because you have to listen to me so often, and yet here you are on a day that is not a normal service. You've chosen to come, even though you know you were going to be listening to me again for several hours. So I'm so thankful that you're here. Yeah.
I meant to ask this before I signed up.
Uh-huh.
What kind of grade did you get on this?
What kind of grade did I get on this? I haven't received that grade yet. Yeah. John mentioned that because this is a seminar I prepared as the capstone project for my doctorate degree. And I did just a couple days ago, I turned in all this information, in one big packet there to my readers who are going to read through all this. And here in a couple weeks, they're going to put me through the ringer on it a little bit and talk about the information and, make me answer questions about, so they'll play the devil's advocate a little bit. You know how that goes. And so I have that coming up in a couple weeks. So actually, if you don't mind praying about that, I would appreciate that. But yeah, then after that, I'll get the final grade on it, and I can report back to you, John, and let you know at that point. So yeah, for real. You want to know? Like, is this D+ level work here, or is this A? What is this? Yeah. Well, I hope this wasn't D+ level work. So that maybe you all can give me a grade. In fact, I do have a survey that you can fill out at the end. You can give me a grade there on that survey if you want. So, all right. Well, some of you might be very excited to see this baseball image up here on the screen. You baseball fans who join me in a love for the game. As a matter of fact, there are two kinds of people in this world who have mindsets that I just don't understand, and that would be atheists and people who don't like baseball. I just don't really understand either of those mindsets. Why would you not like baseball? It's a great game. There's a structure to the game of baseball that neither team can manipulate. It just pits both teams against each other, and they just have to try to be better than each other. And what I mean by that is in the game of baseball, each team gets 27 outs, and there isn't a thing that you can do to change that. You can have a great offensive day for your team. You could go out there and score 12 runs, and that doesn't do anything to the other team's offense. They still get their 27 outs to try to beat you. So it's not like football in that regard. Football, a game kicks off. There's no set number of possessions that each team gets. Maybe one team could get the ball and they could kind of hang on to it for as long as they can, try to keep the other offense off the field. Or maybe they can get a lead and they can try to hang on to the ball and kind of run out the clock. Well, you can't do that in baseball. There is no game clock, right? You can't just sit on a lead and run out the clock. The other team gets their 27 outs, and you just have to beat them. And it's not like basketball either, where if the other team has a great player, you might be able to put some pressure on him defensively, maybe get him into foul trouble so that he has to sit on the bench longer than he normally would. And he might end up on the bench during some moments when otherwise he'd be out there. He might be taking the shots and all that. So you might be able to get the other team's best player out of the game for a while in basketball. Well, in baseball, you can't do that. The other team gets to set their lineup, And their slugger is going to come up in his turn whenever that comes around. And it might be at the most inopportune moment for you. Maybe it's the ninth inning, you're trying to ice the game away, and here comes their best hitter to the plate, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to face him in that moment and try to be better than him. It's such an awesome structure to the game. Well, in this seminar here, we're going to use the game of baseball as an extended analogy as we think about the whole matter of apologetics. Now, before we go any further, we need to define what apologetics is. What is this subject we're even talking about? I hope that maybe this topic isn't entirely brand new to you, but even if it is, that's okay. I think I can explain some of it today in a way that will make it fairly understandable to you, so you won't feel yourself lost throughout the course of the day, even if you're not very familiar with what apologetics is. But we do need to define this before we get any further into this. So let me give you my definition of apologetics here, and then we'll talk about another definition that's a little bit more in-depth. But here's my just basic summary definition. Apologetics is the art of defending the truthfulness of Christianity. The art of defending the truthfulness of Christianity. Because ultimately, when we share our faith with other people, that's what we want them to accept, that Christianity is true. It's true for us and for them. Now, that really cuts against the grain of our culture these days, doesn't it? To say that there are facts that are true for all people. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next session. But that's what we want people to embrace. We want them to see this isn't just an opinion that I hold, but when we share the Christian faith with them, we talk about things like the Bible being the Word of God and Jesus rising from the grave. These are true facts of history and true facts of the present day and true facts about the future. And so we want people to understand that. And sometimes people push back against that, right? People might disagree with us on matters of fact, or they might relegate Christianity to something that's just a personal opinion. You can take it or leave it depending on however you might respond. And so we want to know how to defend the truthfulness of Christianity. All right, let's look at another definition here, a little bit more in depth. This is in your handout here. It says apologetics is concerned with the defense of the Christian faith against charges of falsehood, inconsistency, or credulity. And we'll talk about all those more in just a moment. Indeed, the very word apologetics is derived from the Greek apologia, which means defense. It was a term used in the courts of law in the ancient world. Let's pause there for a moment. I might just interject. My devotional reading lately has been taking me through the end of the book of Acts. And if you remember the storyline of that book, the Apostle Paul is under arrest in the final chapters, and he winds up in courtroom settings in front of some different Jewish and Roman leaders. And several times through there, it talks about, in Greek, Paul giving his apologia, giving his defense against the charges, the false charges that were brought against him. And so that's kind of the setting, that's kind of the picture of this word. We're defending the claims that we're making to someone else. That's the idea. Okay, back to the definition here. As it concerns the Christian faith, apologetics has to do with defending or making a case for the truth of the Christian faith. It is an intellectual discipline that is usually said to serve at least two purposes. One, to bolster the faith of Christian believers, and two, to aid in the task of evangelism. And both of those purposes are very real, very legitimate, very good and helpful. But I might stress, And this is something I want to convince you of, that purpose number one there should always be pursued in the interest of purpose number two. That whenever we might study apologetics just to console ourselves about some of the doubts that we have at times, and again, that's a legitimate purpose, and it's good for you and for me to feel totally confident that our Christian faith is true. But the reason why we should pursue that confidence is so that we will be more bold and daring and better equipped to pursue purpose number two, to evangelize, to share our faith. We don't want to be confident in our faith only for the sake of our own lives. We want to remember that other people need to hear this truth, and they need to be convinced as well that it's true. And so, yes, apologetics has this wonderful goal and purpose of bolstering our own faith, but we should always pursue that in the pursuit of trying to become more confident ambassadors for Christ. Now, Cowan, in that definition, he mentioned three categories of accusations that unbelievers might raise against our faith. First, there he mentioned the category of falsehood. This would be if a skeptic says that it's at odds with reality or the facts. So this might be someone who believes there really are matters of truth and falsehood in the area of religion. They don't relegate it to an area of just opinion, but they might say Christianity just doesn't have the facts right. So a follower of Islam would be an example of someone who might raise an objection like this. Maybe you've never heard this before, but they don't agree that Jesus was actually crucified on the cross. We hear that and we think, well, how could anyone really deny that and disagree with them? They have their own ways of trying to get around that, but that's a matter of fact, isn't it? Jesus either died on the cross or he did not. And so here they're saying, no, Christianity is false when it claims that Jesus died on the cross. So that's one category that someone might raise. A second one here would be inconsistency. And that would be the charge that Christianity is at odds with itself. It's at odds with itself. In other words, this would be if someone says that Christianity makes different claims that cannot both be true because they contradict each other. So, for example, sometimes people push back against the doctrine of the Trinity, and they criticize Christianity because they say, well, you believe this idea about God that can't possibly be true because you're saying he's one God and three gods all at the same time. Well, of course, that's not exactly what we believe, is it? But that would be an example of an accusation from this category. They say, no, you're contradicting yourself, so your Christian faith can't be true. And then the third category here was credulity. That would be that Christianity is at odds with rationality, An example of this would be the claim that we hear sometimes when people say, a thinking person just can't believe in Christianity. If they might be willing to say Christianity has some things going for it, they might say, Christianity has some basis in fact. Yes, Jesus lived and died, and we know his disciples lived and died, and yeah, some of the stuff the Bible talks about is true. But at the end of the day, they might say, a thinking person just can't believe in Christianity because its claims are just too far out there. I don't know if the name Richard Dawkins rings a bell to you at all or not, but he has been a skeptic of Christianity for quite some time, for several decades now. He's a biologist in the United Kingdom. He's written several books criticizing the Christian faith, but he would really fall into this category because he made some waves just a couple years ago by saying that he would rather live in a Christian society than any other society because he sees how Christian values are a benefit to a society, and how a society that's based on Christian values is more just and more free to the people who live in that society. He was saying that specifically in response to the rise of Islam in England, and how there's really been a decrease in overall liberties and freedoms in that country because of it. But still, at the end of the day, Richard Dawkins would say, yeah, I like living in a Christian society, even though I think Christianity's false. And so he's one of those folks who would say, a smart person just can't believe that Christianity is true. Well, toward the end of that definition, there was a little phrase in there where Cowan said this is an intellectual discipline. I hope you weren't psyched out when you heard that phrase. I hope you didn't hear that and think, well, that disqualifies me. So, Tim, this has been good, but I'm going to call it a day and hit the door now because I'm not an intellectual. So if this is an intellectual discipline, well, apparently it's not for me. Well, I don't want you to be psyched out about that phrase because you truly do not have to be a brainiac in order to understand apologetics. Apologetics is just like any other field of study where, yes, it's possible to go into tremendous depth studying it. And yet, there's also a certain basic level of mastery that anyone can get that will serve them well. We could compare it to the field of medicine. When you think about medicine, you can go to medical school and put yourself through the rigors of that discipline of study. And then after that, you can spend residency for years and years. And at the end of all this, you can become a brain surgeon, which is a highly technical, highly specialized discipline of medicine, right? Very few people have the skills to achieve something like that. And yet, in the field of medicine, there's also the whole category of first aid. And that's a category that anyone can come to understand, and that's beneficial for everybody to understand to a certain extent, right? Now, you all know certain details of first aid. Many of you could probably perform the basic movements of CPR if you had to. Most of you could probably perform the Heimlich maneuver rather well if that need came up. You probably have a pretty good idea of how to bandage a cut, or maybe how to apply a tourniquet or something like that if you had to do that. That's still within the field of medicine. It's not brain surgery. Okay, it's not brain surgery. We can see that. But nevertheless, it's a basic mastery of that field of study that anyone can grasp, and it serves all of us well if we do grasp it. And within the field of apologetics, there's a very similar level of mastery as well. Anyone can master some basic facts, some basic thoughts, even some basic arguments from the field of apologetics. And if you will, having that knowledge will serve you very well, because it'll help you pursue those two goals that Stephen Cowan talked about in his definition. It'll bolster your own faith, but then it will also help you become more confident in sharing your faith with other people. So don't be psyched out thinking, apologetics just isn't for me. I can't understand all of that stuff. Yeah, you really can. And I hope that by the end of this seminar, I'll be able to help you understand a few of the issues that come up in apologetics, and hopefully you can understand them in a little more depth than you ever have before. I really think we can get there by the end of the day. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about the goal of this seminar, okay? I should have mentioned as well, I am open to your questions as we go throughout the day, but I'd like to reserve those till the end of each session, okay? I'm hoping that I won't blab on so long in each session that I'll end up taking all the time. I want to leave some time at the end for some Q&A, and so we'll try to make that happen at the end of each session. Hopefully that'll help your understanding just a little bit more. But what is the goal of this seminar, really? It's to get you a little more familiar with apologetics than you were when you woke up this morning. Yeah, hopefully you had a little bit of knowledge about apologetics. If you didn't, again, that's okay. Hopefully by the time you leave, you'll be a little bit more familiar with apologetics. But my other main goal is to use this baseball diamond analogy that we're about to talk about to give you a framework for thinking about how to respond to objections to the faith that come up when you're talking with other people. Because you've probably had this experience before in your life. I know I have. Sometimes I still do. Where I might be talking to someone about matters of faith, and they might start raising some disagreements, and it might come to light that we disagree about a lot of different things. And then quite often, when that's come to light, it's very natural for us to think, I don't know where to go next. I mean, I can see now that me and my friend or me and my neighbor, we don't agree on matters of religion. And they've raised so many different things. Because, these conversations, sometimes they can be wide-ranging, right? You might talk about a bunch of different things all in the course of one conversation. And after the conversation, you're reflecting on it and you think, I have no idea what to talk about next. It's like they've presented me with this knot that I have no idea how to untie. And I don't even know what strand to tug on first. Well, this baseball diamond analogy is meant to give you a framework for thinking about which issues to tackle in which order. So that probably after that initial conversation, you might be able to use this framework and think, okay, I want to keep talking to this person about my faith, but I can see we disagree on this and that and that. But okay, I should hone in and focus on this issue first, because that'll lay a good foundation, and then we can try to build on that. Then we can address this other disagreement that we have. And then hopefully, Lord willing, we'll be agreed up to that point, and then we can address this other issue that they brought up. Okay, so this really is a framework for extended conversations with other people, because probably in the course of just one conversation, you're not going to be able to get through a full defense of the Christian faith. And so I hope maybe you hear me say that and you think, okay, well, that takes the pressure off a little bit. I'm glad you said that, Tim, because I didn't think I could accomplish that anyway. I'm glad you're saying that's not even the goal. Okay, but this framework hopefully will help you think through how to address those issues in a logical way that step by step will build a case for the Christian faith. All right, so let's talk about this baseball diamond analogy. In your notes, you might want to find the diagram of the baseball field there. So let's talk through this and talk about the different parts of the baseball diamond and what these all are supposed to represent. Okay, I didn't write this on the diagram itself, but you'll see this in your notes, that home plate is supposed to represent evangelism here in this analogy. Home plate represents evangelism. And the reason for that is because in the game of baseball, that's where an offensive player has to start, right? He has to start at home plate. But he's also hoping to be able to go around the bases and get back to home plate, right? He wants to get to home plate, and if he gets a base hit, if he gets a walk, he gets out there on the bases. He doesn't want to stay on the bases, right? and the next batter's up behind him, they don't want to leave him stranded on the bases. He's got to start at home plate and hopes to get around and come back to home plate eventually. And when we are talking with other people about matters of faith, evangelism should be in that kind of role for us. It should be where we start, and then if we have to talk about some disagreements with people, it should also be the place that we want to get back to. Evangelism should be the place we want to get back to. But definitely it's where we should start. The first time that you might ever speak to a person about matters of faith, the thing you should do is just share the gospel with them. Because for one thing, you never know, they might be ready to accept it. If you haven't spoken about matters of faith with them before, you don't really have a great idea of, maybe their spiritual background, or maybe they've heard the gospel 3 or 4 times and have just never accepted it. So since you're not really aware of their thoughts about matters of faith, the gospel is where you should start, because ultimately that's what we want them to accept, isn't it? We want them to trust in the promise made by God through Jesus Christ, that He will forgive us of our sins. And so it's kind of like modern baseball in this sense too, that every time a batter gets up to bat, he's swinging for the fences, right? That's the first thing that they do. First pitch they see, man, they're trying to hit that thing 425 feet, right? Even the pitchers today get up to bat and they're trying to hit it out. So when you're talking to somebody about your faith, swing for the fences, share the gospel with them, and they just might be ready to accept it. But after you share the gospel with them, and if they raise some kind of objection against the Christian faith, then we might have to round the bases with them. We might have to talk about their objections, help them think through these things. But again, we're going to do all of it with the hopes of getting back to evangelism, getting back to the point where hopefully we have cleared away some of their objections so that they can see the gospel in a fresh, new light. And that is so very important for us to remember, that the goal of apologetics is never to simply win arguments with other people. We should not pursue apologetics just because we want to show people how smart we are, or show other people, hey, I can play mental chess with you all day long. You raise this objection, I know how to go right back against it. I know how to make you look like a fool because of the things you believe. No, that's not our goal. And unfortunately, we see that far too often in apologetics, especially the way it's often carried out on social media these days, if you happen to stumble across any part of that. Far too often we see people who are debating religion just simply for the purpose of trying to show off their own smarts. But that is absolutely not our goal. If we have to talk about something like the existence of God, or if we have to defend the truthfulness of Scripture, we want to have those conversations in such a way that we are able to eventually come back around and share the gospel with that person again. So that's why home plate represents evangelism. We start there, and if we have to talk about other things, well, that's okay, but we hope to get back around to evangelism eventually, okay? But what about the bases here? What do the bases represent? Well, the bases represent kind of 3 different categories of objections that we might have to talk about. And the bases present these categories of objections in a way that's very logical for us to deal with them. And we'll see more of that as we go throughout the rest of the seminar today. But the first base issues here deal with some of the philosophical questions that come up surrounding religion. And you can see just a few examples of those here on the diagram. Questions like, how do we determine what's true? We're trying to convince people that Christianity is true, but how do we even know what's true and what's false? Who gets to determine that, or how do we determine that? Or sometimes people might relegate religion to an area where they think true and false doesn't apply. They think, well, it's just a matter of opinion. Anybody can think whatever they want about religion, and it's not really something where one person's right and another person's wrong. Okay, so that's an example of a first base kind of question here. Another example would be something like, can human language truly describe God? Skeptics over the years have brought up a question like that. You know, we're using our words to try to talk about this God that we say is incomprehensible. He's so grand that can we even describe him and say truly what he's like? Or a question like the third one on the list here. Isn't the physical world all there is? You know, this world that we can see and touch and taste and all that and hear, all of that, isn't that all there is to reality? You're trying to tell me about some God, but I can't even see him with my eyes. I can't shake his hand. You know, I can't talk to him with my voice and hear him respond to me through my ears. Well, how can I even believe that there's this whole other dimension to reality where you say there's some God who exists? And so some of those questions, certainly they deal with philosophical issues that might come up. And we'll see in the next session why it's important to deal with those first. Because they relate to the very possibility of religion being true and false, the very possibility of the existence of God, the very possibility of having a meaningful conversation about religion in the first place. So if a person has objections along those lines, it's good for us to deal with those first. Now, I suspect that's a category of questions, a category of objections that you might hear, and you might think, I don't have the foggiest idea how to respond to those. And that's okay, because there are all kinds of resources and apologetic teachers who have done good work on these subjects who are available to you. This would be an area in particular where you might find yourself needing to say, hey, you know, you asked me a great question about, isn't the physical world all there is? And you know what? I want to pass a resource along to you that will help you think about that a little bit more. Okay, so, if that category sounds, it sounds a little bit out of left field, well, that doesn't fit with my diagram, does it? Because it's first base. But if that category sounds intimidating to you, that's okay. That's natural, because those are the questions that are a bit foreign to some of our ways of thinking. So again, that might be a moment when you connect with your friend again and you say, hey, you know what? I found these great resources that talk about this question that you had. And that also can be a very enlightening moment for you to discover if your friend really wants to continue talking about this or not. Because if your friend is genuinely curious about that question, then they would be willing to check out some resources that you might offer to them. If they're truly curious about it, then if you offer them some resources, they're probably going to say, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Because again, they're genuinely curious. They really want to get to the bottom of it. On the other hand, if you offer to give them some resources and they show no interest in that, and they're like, well, thanks. And then maybe you check up with them a week later and you say, hey, did you have a chance to read those things I sent you? And they're like, no, I didn't really get around to it. That's probably a great sign for you to understand, okay, they're not really enthusiastic about it at this point. So it's probably time for me to not really push the issue any further. Maybe we can revisit this at another time. All right. But those are the first base issues. Philosophical questions about religion. The second base issue would be the existence of God. The existence of God. And here, when we talk about the existence of God, we can use arguments that are based on a number of different observations. And we'll talk about even more than the ones that are listed right here on the diagram in session 3. But we can use arguments based on the fact that the universe has a beginning. The universe began to exist, and things that begin to exist can't cause themselves to exist. A baby would be a perfect example of that. That baby was caused to exist. It didn't exist before it came into being, before conception. So something else had to cause that baby to come to exist. Well, the universe is exactly the same. It had a beginning, so something had to cause it to begin to exist. And there are other observations we can talk about with the universe, the nature of the universe, the order, the purpose that we see in the universe, the fine-tuning that scientists have discovered about the universe. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. We can also look at what human beings are like. We'll do that specifically in session 3. We're going to talk about our moral impulse as human beings and what that says about the necessary existence of a creator who has placed moral obligations upon us. Okay, so we'll talk about that more in session 3. But that would be the second base issue, the fact that God exists, that there is a God who can then take all the actions that we as Christians claim he has taken in the world, like giving us a book that's a message from him, or performing miracles as we read in that book. Miracles even like raising Jesus from the dead. There has to be a God for there to be a being who could take actions like that in the world, right? And so we need to defend that if someone doesn't believe in the existence of God. Third base question then would be all of the specific claims of our Christian faith. Once we've defended at second base that there is a God, now at third base we want to convince people that Christianity is the true revelation of that God, that the Christian claims about him are true. So here we might need to give arguments for the deity of Christ, help people understand that Christ had his two natures. He had both the human nature and the divine nature. Or we might need to give an argument for the resurrection of Christ. That's what we'll focus on in session 4 today. Or we may need to talk about the inspiration of Scripture or the exclusivity of Christianity, that our Christian faith really is the one true revelation of the God who exists, and that people need to embrace God through Christ, not try to embrace him some other way or follow him some other way, but we need to embrace him through Christ. All right, let's talk about who we would need to advance to these different bases, okay? That'll help us think through the kind of people that we might need to talk about some of these different issues with, okay? So first off, who would we need to advance to first base? Who is it that doesn't yet agree with us on some of those philosophical matters of Christianity that we might need to talk to them about these things? Well, agnostics and skeptics would be one category. Agnostics and skeptics. People who are maybe just ambivalent about the nature of truth, especially when it comes to religion. Maybe you've heard before. That's what that word agnostic means. Essentially, somebody who just says, well, maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't, but who can really know? And since we can't really know, how relevant is it to our daily lives anyway? I seem to be able to get by just fine, even though I'm really not sure if God exists. And so folks in that category, we might need to encourage them to see, hey, you know what? Religion really is an area that we shouldn't be lackadaisical about. It really does make staggering claims upon our lives that we ought to take seriously. And we should get to the bottom of whether those claims are true or not. So that would be one category. Another would be Buddhists. In Buddhism, religion isn't really a matter of true doctrines versus false doctrines. Buddhism is more about following certain practices like meditation or certain habits in your life that are supposed to get you in touch with the divinity that's already within you. Okay, that's kind of the idea in Buddhism. There's not a God out here and us down here. Their basic idea is that we are all part of the divine spirit, and we just need to come to realize that and to understand that. And the practices of Buddhism are supposed to help us get in tune with the divinity that's already inside of us. And so they don't get all that hung up about questions of doctrine, certainly not as much as other religions do. So we might, again, need to help them understand, hey, look, our religion makes some very significant claims about a God who is other than us, a God who created us, and we need to be reconciled to him. So we might need to help them get to first base where they believe that religion really is a matter of truth and falsehood. A third type of person would be people with a vague spirituality. People with a vague spirituality. It seems like we're encountering more and more people like this in our culture. These would be people who don't follow any particular religion, and yet they still want to cultivate the spiritual aspect of their lives. And so they might follow a collection of different habits or practices in their lives that really don't make any sense when you lump them all together. And yet, in their minds, that's okay. It's okay if those practices seem to contradict each other because, again, they're not really thinking of religion as something that's true or false. They're thinking of it more so as just, is it useful and helpful to me or not? And so, they might be praying, and they might be practicing some Eastern meditation. Things that really aren't supposed to go together. Because in prayer, we talk to a God who is other than us. In Eastern meditation, we're supposedly getting in touch with the God who is us. So which one is it? Are we communicating with a God who's out there? Are we communicating with ourselves in a sense, since we have that divine spark within us? But folks in this category don't necessarily worry about all those things because they think, well, it cultivates the spiritual aspect of my life. So it makes me feel good. So we need to help these people understand religion is a matter of truth and falsehood. All right, what about second base? Again, the second base concern is the existence of God. So who is it that doesn't yet agree with us about the existence of God? Well, certainly atheists would be in that category, right? Atheists definitely believe that religion is an area of truth and falsehood. They just believe it's false that God exists, right? That's their conviction. So they don't leave it as an open question the way agnostics would. No, atheists are convinced that there is no God. And so they agree with us on first base. Do you see that? They agree with us that religious conversations are about matters that are true or false. So we're already standing on first base with atheists. So we need to try to help them get to second base, to where they believe that God exists. All right, another group that we might need to advance to second base would be Hindus. This is an Eastern religion, but Hindus are much more inclined to believe that religion is an area of truth and falsehood. At least they believe that other religions other than Hinduism are false. Okay, they are convinced about that. Okay, so they don't really leave that as an open question. It's a little bit weird because Hinduism is wide open to a huge number of different gods, or at least expressions of the divine spirit. And yet they would definitely say that a religion like Christianity is false because we believe in only the one God. And so they're more likely to agree with us on the first base issue, at least the issue of truth and falsehood in religion. So we need to help them get to second base. We need to help them have a clearer understanding of what God really is like. All right, then what about third base? Who would we need to advance to third base? So again, these are people who already agree with us that religion is an area of truth and falsehood. These are people who already agree with us that there is a God. So you can see how Muslims and religious Jews would fall into that category. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are sometimes called the three great monotheistic religions. That just means we all believe that there is only one God. Even though we believe different things about what that God is like, we do have that significant point of agreement, at least, where we don't have to convince Muslims that there's only one God. They already believe that. Religious Jews, the same way. We don't have to convince them that there's only one God. They already believe that. So they're already on second base with us. And so now our point of discussion with them is going to be about the specific claims of the Christian faith. Maybe comparing the Bible and the Quran, for example, or perhaps pointing out to a religious Jew how Jesus has fulfilled all of these prophecies that he thinks maybe are still awaiting fulfillment. And we can point them and say, no, your Messiah has already come. You don't need to wait for him any longer. He's already come. So Muslims and religious Jews would be there. Also, people who are following some of the different cults like Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses and some of the other cults that are in different ways spin-offs of true Christianity. Now, people in those cults, they already give some kind of honor and respect to Jesus Christ. In some way, he is a revered figure in their religious beliefs, but in these cults, they have some false ideas about what Jesus is really like and what he's really done for us. So they need to come to a more accurate understanding of the truth about Jesus. Or the same thing about the Bible. Mormons respect the Bible. Jehovah's Witnesses respect the Bible. Essentially, any cult that you're going to encounter, they respect the Bible, but they might believe that it's been mishandled over the years, that maybe Christians have introduced some errors into it, and so maybe some other books are necessary to kind of balance it all out. And so those are the kind of things that we're going to have to talk about with them. The final person at this point would also be the average American. The average American believes that God exists. Atheism, despite all the press that it might get, is not a popular viewpoint in our country. It's not. It actually never has been. I think I can confidently say it never will be. So your average American believes in God, right? But your average American who's not a Christian believes that God is just basically a really good dude. You know, he's really chill. He kind of wants the best for us. And, you know, if we don't do exactly what he wants, well, you know, he might wish it had been otherwise, but he's just going to kind of look the other way when we stand face to face with him, you know. Because, again, he's just such a good dude. I mean, you know, we can surely talk things over with him and, you know, come to some kind of compromise with him on the day of judgment, right? That's what the average American believes. And so we need to help them understand, no, what the Scriptures tell us about God really is true, right? That he is holy and just. And we can't hope to just work out some kind of compromise with him on the day of judgment, as if we're just going to be able to talk things through and God's going to say, yeah, I kind of see your point, and so, you know, hey, come on into my heaven. Oh, just you think about the wake-up call that a person might receive if that's been their thoughts about God throughout their lives. Interestingly enough, though, and we're going to see this in our next session, is that with the average American, increasingly, we kind of have a need to tag up at first base before we try to go to third base. Because we're going to see in our next session how the idea of truth has become so unclear and fuzzy in our culture that we need to help the average American get a better handle on that before we might defend some of the specific claims of Christianity. And it's kind of interesting because, again, your average American believes in God. And so it's like if we can tag up at first base and clear all that up, then we're probably ready to go right past second base and get to third base. Because, again, they already believe that there is a God. They're just going fuzzy on some of those first base issues. So let's see what kind of questions might be rattling around in your mind at this point before we take a break here in just a few minutes, okay? So what questions are on your mind, if any?
Do the points usually come out in order pretty clearly, or some of the issues maybe arrive on third base before first, or most of the time they're in that order?
Yes, so the question kind of, do the issues usually come out in that order? I would say from the person you're talking to, no, they won't. But this framework is for us to use to then think back on the conversations we've had and say, okay, I'm not going to make a lot of headway with this person if we focus on this third base question right now. So I need to focus on the first base question with them before we then try to talk about some of these other things. Yeah, so this is, and I might highlight, Robbie, that, yeah, this is a framework for us to use rather than a script. There is an important difference there, because this is not a script that I'm offering you where you will then have to say, well, no matter what, I have to talk about first base and second base and third base with this person, okay? Even if I can tell we already agree on these things, I still got to talk about them because that's what Tim's script said. No, this isn't a script. It's a framework. It's like one of those maps at the zoo that has the big red star on it that says, you are here, right? And then from there, you can kind of see where the different paths go in order to get you to the next exhibit that you want to see. That's what this framework is like. So that as you have a conversation with someone, and again, this may happen after the conversation, and that's normal and natural. But it might be that you think of this framework and you see, okay, all right, I can see that my neighbor and I agree on these issues. Okay, and so that's good. That gives us some common ground to stand on. So really the next thing I should probably talk with them about is this. So that's kind of the idea of this. So from our point of view, there is a value in talking about the issues in this order: first base, second base, third base. The person we're talking to will probably never raise them in that particular order, but it's kind of for us then to use the framework in order to get situated for future conversations. Now, how about other questions?
Tim, this is just such a heartbreaking thing for me, and maybe this is a whole different thing, but for people that have been raised, I mean, we're hearing more and more about this, raised in church, have been taught all the things, and then maybe they leave and somebody else talks to them and they completely turn their back on all that they knew as truth. Do those situations fit in these categories? When you're talking to someone that has been taught, what is it called?
Deconstruction is the trend that you're talking about, yeah. Sure, yeah, it is. It's unsettling because, like you say, I mean, we can see so many examples of people who have grown up in church, they've been in church maybe their whole lives. In some cases, they've shown a lot of passion to love and to serve the Lord, but then, for some reason that changes, and now maybe they're deeply questioning everything they believed before. But yes, absolutely, the kind of questions and objections that they raise would fall exactly on here. Usually, they'd kind of be third base sort of questions. It's very common for people who say that they've deconstructed to still believe in God. They still believe that there is a God out there. Very often, and this is a general summary statement, but very often what they are now coming to believe is that Christianity has not represented that God correctly. That, maybe over the years, just from serving our own interests, Christians have distorted the truth about God or something like that. And so in quite a few cases, at least more common cases that I'm thinking of right now, those people would still agree with us about the issue of truth, because they're now saying, hey, what you're saying about God is false, right? And they still believe that there's a God, so first base, second base, we have pretty good agreement. So it's really these third base questions that become the point of contention. And I might mention as well that quite often with people who are deconstructing, it's going to be helpful to pursue some of these apologetic conversations with them, especially initially. But what we will often discover is that intellectual questions and objections that they might raise are a smokescreen for something else that's troubling them even more. There are times when maybe people grow up in church and they've just never been exposed to objections against the Christian faith. They've never heard some of these skeptical things like, well, it was Emperor Constantine of Rome who put the Bible together, and, he just picked whatever books he wanted, and he left out some books that really should have been in there. And, sometimes you never hear that claim until you hear it for the first time, right? And so sometimes people hear things like that, and they're like, whoa, is that true? Is that the case? And quite often, in that situation, apologetics will be very helpful to that person because it'll help them to answer a question that's been raised for them. But sometimes you'll discover very quickly that these intellectual questions aren't the real issue, but that someone might be grasping to these intellectual objections, perhaps because what they really want is to just live however they want to live, and give in to whatever temptations they want to give into. I'm not saying that's true of everybody who has deconstructed, but I guess to sum this up real quick, sometimes we find out very quickly that apologetics is not going to be the issue to keep pushing with these people. That the whole matter of showing them love and patience is going to be even more helpful in that season than just continuing to go round and round with them about these intellectual questions. Yeah. Okay, I do want to make sure I give you a break, but do we have one more question here before we go into our break? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
April 18th and 19th. One of our main sessions is going to be how to share the gospel. Very simple gospel as to a child.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a good plug for the missions conference.
Absolutely, that's right. Missions conference is going to help us get equipped with that. And that is a vital skill for every Christian to have, right? For all of us to have. Because we are all going to find ourselves standing at home plate with other people, right? With opportunities to share the gospel with other people. And then, we might discover, hey, they see things differently than I do. And then we might have to touch on some of these, different apologetic issues. And that might even be the base then, or the time then, when the body of Christ is going to come together to share all of our collective gifts, right? What I mean is, you might be the one to share the gospel with somebody, and then they might raise questions that you feel like you don't really know how to answer, and that's when we have the opportunity to draw on the resources of other people, or then to introduce that person to your other friend and say, hey, I think you'd enjoy talking to this friend of mine real well. Could I get the two of you together for coffee and we'll talk through all this? Okay. But we all are going to be standing there at home plate where we can share the gospel with other people. And I'm glad we're going to get some focused training on that at the missions conference there. All right, let's take a 10-minute break here. Lord willing, no more than that, please. It'll take about a 10-minute break. We're going to shoot to have lunch at noon, and so we want to try to be done with the next session by then. So we'll be back here in 10 minutes.